We're now on Daf Lamed Ches Amid Beis, and we're presenting the sheet of Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, who is the son of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, and yet he's going to disagree with his father. Kol mitzvah shenitztavu Yisrael kodem knisason la'aretz. Rashi on the top of the Omid says, Dahainu chovas haguf. And therefore these mitzvahs applied even in the midbar before they entered into the land. Noages bein ba'aretz bein b'chutz la'aretz. The very fact that the mitzvah was given before they entered into the land is proof positive that the mitzvah applies even in chutz la'aretz. But liachar knisas la'aretz, if there is a mitzvah that they were commanded in after they entered the land, einan oheges ela ba'aretz, then the mitzvah is limited to Eretz Yisrael. And therefore, Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon is going to disagree with his father Reb Shimon about the Isur Chadash, because the Isur Chadash was given to Bnei Yisrael after they entered into the land, which means, according to the Shita Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, the Isur Chadash is limited to Eretz Yisrael. Whereas Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said that the Isur Chadash was noeg even in Chutz La'aretz. That was the whole basis for the Kal Vachomer to derive Orla Kilayim. Now, Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon agrees that there are two mitzvos that are exceptions to the rule. Chutz min hashmatas ksafim. We'll have a whole discussion about that in a minute. And shiluach avodim, shichra avodim in Yovel. Shafal pishin itztavo leim liachar knisas nogos bein ba'aretz u bein b'chutz la'aretz. So, according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, it comes out that there's no Isur Chadash outside of the land of Eretz Yisrael, because the tzivui of Chadash, as the Gemara is going to explain, came after they entered into the land. And we also saw this on Lamed Ches Amid Aleph. So a mitzvah that was commanded after they entered the land is limited and only applies in the land. So that would mean that Orla and Kilayim would not be asur, according to the Torah law, in Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon's framework in Chutz La'aretz, because the mitzvahs of, or shall we call them the Surei Lavim of Orla and Kilayim, were only given to Bnei Yisrael after they entered into the land. So why is Orla and Kilayim asur in Chutz La'aretz? That's called Halacha Moshe Sinai. But in any event, as far as the Isur Chadash, Orla and Kilayim, Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon is arguing with his father Reb Shimon, because Reb Shimon held that the Isurim of Chadash, Orla, and Kilayim apply on a Doraisa level, even in Chutz La'aretz. Now the Gemara wants to know about the exceptions to the rule. That Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon held that Shmitas Ksafim was only commanded to them after they entered into the land. Now, we just finished saying, if you remember with the Rashi on the top of the Amud, that Nitztavu Yisrael Kodem Knisas La'aretz applies to Chovas HaGuf, and Hashmatas Ksafim is a Chovas HaGuf. It has nothing to do with the Karka at all. So how do we know that they didn't get the tzivui of Hashmatas Ksafim before they entered into the land? It would make sense that if all the mitzvahs that are Chovas HaGuf were given to Bnei Yisrael before they entered into the land, then Shmitas Ksafim should have been given to Bnei Yisrael before they entered into the land. And the Gemara answers, Lo nitzucha el l'kedetanya. So now we're going to learn a brisa, and from this brisa we're going to prove that they were not commanded on Shmitas Ksafim, even though it's a Chovas HaGuf, until they entered into the land. And again, that explains the formulation of Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon for the exception in the case of Shmitas Ksafim of our rule, that even though they didn't get the command until they landed in Eretz Yisrael, which would mean that it's, according to Reb Shimon Bar Elazar's general principle, it should only apply to Eretz Yisrael. Nevertheless, no, Shmitas Ksofim applies in Chutz La'aretz, even though the mitzvah Shmitas Ksofim was given to them after they entered into the land. And Desani Rabbi Omer, we got the mitzvah of Shmitas Ksofim in Dvarim Perek Tezvav, V'zeh Dvar Shmita Shamot. There's a double language here, Shmita Shamot. And that's going to indicate some sort of a reboot. And what are we going to derive from this reboot? B'shtei Shmitas HaKosim Medaber. The Torah is comparing and, in a sense, integrating two different Shmitos. What are the two different Shmitas? Shmitas Karka, Shmitas Ksofim. And what is this equation between Shmitas Karka and Shmitas Ksofim going to teach us? What halacha do we derive from that equation? Bisman shatom mishamet karka, atom mishamet ksof. Bisman she'i atom mishamet karka, I atom mishamet ksof. So what does this mean? When Klal Yisrael were in the Midbar, was there Shmitas Ksofim? Well, for example, after Bnei Yisrael went into Golus, and the Kiddushin of Eretz Yisrael was Batla, at least the first Kiddushin, then was there Shmitas Ksofim? And the answer is no. Why not? Why wasn't there Shmitas Ksofim in the Midbar? Why isn't there Shmitas Ksofim after Golus? And the answer is because the Torah integrated, or shall we say compared, Shmitas Ksofim to Shmitas Karka. And just like Shmitas Karka is totally dependent upon Kedushas Eretz Yisrael and only applies in Eretz Yisrael, and that's a Chovas Karka, so too Shmitas Ksofim, surprisingly, despite the fact that it's a Chovas Haguf, nevertheless it's like Shmitas Karka, and it only applies when Shmitas Karka applies. Now, as far as where it applies, that's already a horse of a different color. Because as we saw in Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, Shmitas Ksofim, even though it was a mitzvah that was given after they landed in Eretz Yisrael, nevertheless, it's no heges bein bar, it's bein b'chutz la'aretz. But again, it's only no heges b'chutz la'aretz when it's no heges ba'aretz, meaning when there's another Shemitah called Shmitas Karka. Frek the Gemara, Kashan Rebbe, V'ema, since the Torah went ahead and equated Shmitas Karka and Shmitas Ksofim, why don't we say that hekesh should go even further? And Makom Shatom Mishamid Karka, Tom Mishamid Ksof, Makom Sheina Tom Mishamid Karka, Iya Tom Mishamid Karka, Iya Tom Mishamid Ksofim. Why don't we now say that Shmitas Ksofim is limited to Eretz Yisrael? We said that according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, based on Rebbe, the mitzvah of Shmitas Ksofim was given together with Shmitas Karka after entering into Eretz Yisrael. Fine. But we also said that the mitzvah of Shmitas Ksofim is no heges even in Chutz La'aretz. That's an unfair equation. If we have an equation in the pasuk because it says Shamot Tishmot, Hashmit Tishmot, that Shmitas Ksofim is like Shmitas Karka, then it should only be knowing in Eretz Yisrael like Shmitas Karka. Our answer is Talmud Lomar. There's a ribui of Kikara Shmita Lashem. Just 1 second. Second, I think it's Lashem. Am I right here? There's a misprint here in the, Kikar Shmita Lashem is a misprint here in the Masifta. He writes Kikar Shmita La. No, it's Lashem. And apparently this is an extra pasuk. L'rabos, it comes to be marbe mikol mokom, even in Chutz La'aretz, there's a mitzvah of Shmitas Ksofim. Okay, now we switch gears over to Shiluach Avodim. We said that according to Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, even though the mitzvah of Shiluach Avodim was given after they entered into the land, nevertheless it's no heges even in Chutz La'aretz. So the Gemara asks the following question: why did Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon have to bother telling me that Shmitas Avodim, Shiluach Avodim applies even in Chutz La'aretz? Shiluach Avodim Chovas HaGufi. For sure, it's no heges in chutzlar. It's like any chovas haguf. And the Gemara answers, Salkadait Kamina Holuksi in the Pash Shiluch Avad Vayikra Chafei Ukrosem Dror Ba'aretz. What does that imply? Ba'aretz in B'chutzlaretz lo. That the mitzvah of Shiluach Avadim is only no heges in Aretz, Ba'aretz, but not in Chutzlaretz. And therefore, Rabbi Elazar of Shimon had to give us a special drasha to teach me that even though it says in the parasha of Shiluch Avadim crossing Draba Aretz, nevertheless it's no heges even b'chutz Aretz. And how do we derive this? Talmud Lomar Yovel Hi. And these two words Yovel Hi are completely redundant because the Torah says immediately afterwards Yovel Hi Shnasa Chamishim Shana Tielochem. So why did the Torah add the two words Yovel Hi? It's a repetition, and the answer is to ribui to teach me Mikol Makom that Shiluach Avadim is a mitzvah no heges even in chutzlaretz. Frek the Gemara in Kain Matam Elom Ba'aretz. So why did the Torah deliberately confuse us by adding the word ukrosem dror ba'aretz, implying that Shiluach Avadim is only in Eretz Yisrael? And the answer is to teach us a very important halacha. Bisman shadror noig ba'aretz noig af b'chutzlaretz. Eina dror noig ba'aretz. It's just like we saw earlier with regard to Shmitas Ksafim, that Shmitas Ksafim, in terms of the time period, not the place and the location, but the time period, when it's a mitzvah no heges, that depends upon Shmitas Karka. So therefore, in Midbar or after Golus, there's no Shmitas Ksafim like there's no Shmitas Karka. We have now a parallel situation with regard to Shiluch Avadim. And that's going to tell me that Shiluach Avadim, even though it's no heges in chutzlaretz, nevertheless, it is bound by the same restrictions and conditions that apply to Yovel. For example, in Yovel, we need something called Kol Yoshveh Oleha. He points this out here. That there's a brisa in Erchin on Daf Lamed Beis Lamed Beis that Mishagolu Shevet Ruven v'Shevet Gad v'Chatzi Shevet Menashe Botlu Ayovos Shenemar Ukrosem Dror Ba'aretz L'Chol Yoshvel Bizman Shekol Yoshvel Leo V'Lo Bizman Shegolu Miktsosem. So if a segment of Klal Yisrael are in Golus, there's no Yovel, and if there's no Yovel, there's no Shiluach Avadim. So the Afka of Yovel is also going to be mafkia the mitzvah of Shiluach Avadim, even though Shiluach Avadim is noig in chutzlaretz. Now earlier, the Gemara had brought down a machlokus between Reb Shimon and Reb Elazar, meaning Reb Elazar Bereb Shimon, his son, about the Isa Chodesh Orla and Kilayim, where the Ninoah goes even in chutzlaretz. Tanan Chosam, we learned in a brisa, or a Mishnah, I should say, in the third parak of Orla, HaChodesh Osim and Ator B'chol Mokum. So far, this Mishnah seems to support Rabbi Elazar Reb Shimon, because B'chol Mokum seems to imply that that even Tvuas Chutzlaretz is Asur B'Chadash, even though it grew in Chutzlaretz. So that really sounds like Rebbe. But then it says, Orla halacha v'kalayim divrei sofer. That Orla in Chutzlaretz is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Kilayim kerem, it means in Chutzlaretz is only midrabanan. So how do we reconcile the reisha here of this Mishnah with the Sefer? And Rashi says that this Tana holds that whenever it says in the Torah Moshav, it means b'chol makom shatem yoshvim, even b'chutz la'aretz. So since the Torah in the Parsha of Chadash says b'chol moshvot sechem, that's a ribui for even chutz la'aretz. We don't have a parallel ribui for Orla and Kilayim, and therefore the use of Orla and Kilayim and chutz la'aretz is only either Halach l'Moshe Sinai or a D'Rabbanan. Halach Moshe Sinai in the case of Orla, and D'Rabbanan in the case of Kilayim. Now the Gemara clarifies, my halacha, when the Mishnah says as far as Orla, that if you have peros that grew in chutz la'aretz, it's halacha, meaning that it's also midin halacha. Rabbi Yehuda ben Shmuel, hilchis medina. According to Shmuel, these are hilchos medina. What's made hilchos medina? It means that the obligation of Orla in peros chutz la'aretz is not really me'ikar din. It's a minhag that they were manig amongst the bnei chutz la'aretz as a chumrah. But Ula, on the other hand, Omar b'shem Rabbi Yochanan, that halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Halacha doesn't mean some sort of a minhag hamakom, a minhag hamedina, to be machmir in chutz la'aretz, but rather Orla in chutz la'aretz is halacha l'Moshe Sinai, which is almost like a doraisa. So Ula now is going to raise an objection to Shmuel, who says that Orlas chutz la'aretz is hilchos medina. Omar le Ula the Rabbi Yehuda bishlem l'didi the amino. I said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan Orlas chutz la'aretz halacha l'Moshe Sinai, and therefore it has an iser chamur. Orla is more chomer than, for example, Kilayim, because Kilayim is only D'Rabbanan chutz la'aretz. Orla in chutz la'aretz is halacha Moshe Sinai, which is a quasi doraisa. Hainu deshani lan bein safek Orla l'safek Kilayim. And we're going to quote a Mishnah in the Masechet Orla to prove that safek Orla is awesome. And why is Safek Orla also? Why not apply the principle of Safek D'Rabbanan L'Kula? And the answer is because Orla is D'Oraisa Begeder Halach L'Moshe Sinai, according to Ula. But in the case of Safek Kilayim, which is only a Safek D'Rabbanan, we're going to be making this Snan. The Mishnah says, let's say you have an orchard, Safek Orla, and you're not sure whether the fruits that are being produced in this orchard of trees are from the first 3 years, or maybe the trees were planted earlier than that, and therefore it's not Orla. And the Mishnah differentiates between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz la'aretz. But Eretz Asur, and we're going to apply the principle of Safek D'Oraisa L'Kula, but the Surya, which is close to Eretz Yisrael, and it was conquered by David HaMelech in order to attach it and annex it to Eretz Yisrael, mutter. So it means that Safek Orla is mutter in chutz la'aretz. And that's Surya. B'chutz la'aretz. Therefore, we can even take it a step further. Let's say we have areas that are very far from Eretz Yisrael, is Yored V'Lokeach. In other words, he's allowed to even direct the Balabayis to pick up the Orla, and it's a Safek Orla, and eat it. U'bivad shelo yar'enu locate. That he shouldn't see a Jew selling when he collects the pears from the Elon, that of Vade Orla. So again, basically, what we see here is that there's a chumrah in Safek Orla. which is going to prove ula. The ila gabi kilayim tanan kerem anatua yerek. So you have vegetables growing together with vines, and there's an iser kalai kerem. The yerek nimkar chutzlo, and the Baal Bais is selling from this combination of a kerem with a yerek. He says here, Ubal Bais mocher michutz lekerem yerek me'amin hagodel bekerem ha'asur. And ba'aretz asur, b'surya mutar, b'chutz la'aretz, yored v'located v'vad shelo yalkot, shelo yilkot b'yad. So the Chachamim prohibited kilayim in chutz la'aretz, but they only prohibited the zriya, or the case that we said before, l'kita b'yadayim. But in Syria, even though it's chutz la'aretz, they were machmir, and they asid even achil, because it's Krovel Eretz Yisrael. Oh, so now we get to Ula's kasha on Shmuel, on Rav Yehuda. So I'm going to read to you the Masechet. He says, Bishlema im nomar kidvarai she'iser ola b'chutz la'aretz hu me'aloch l'moshe misinu muvan madua hikilu be'iser kilayim b'chutz la'aretz she'enu ela midivrei sofrim yosef me'asher be'iser ola. Of course, in Orla it says ubilvad shelo yirenu locate. And in Kilayim it says ubilvad shelo yilkot biyad. El lididach, according to you, Rav Yehuda, that the Isar Ol in Chutzarts is only a minhag Medina, and the Isar Ol and Kilayim are equal in Chutzarts, no difference. Both of them are called minhag Medina, and they're not also in Torah. Why were they making a kilayim more than they were in Orla? They should have equated the two dinim. And as the Gemara says here on Lamites, Nisnei, the Tana should have said, O bazeh vazeh, yored velocate, O bazeh vazeh yored, O bazeh vazeh, sorry, yored velokeach. Right, that's where he's Eino Roa Mehechan locate. Or Bazel Bezeh is Yored Velocate. So even Orla, which is only an Iser Chachomim in Chutz La'aretz, according to Rav Yehuda, so the Iser is only Notea or Malaket B'Yadayim. So Rav Yehuda answers the Ormalei Shmuel Rav Anan. Shmuel already paskined for Rav Anan, his student, to equate the dinim of Orl and Kilayim and Chutz La'aretz one to the other, and Tani, and change the language of the Mishnah. Oh, you have two choices: Bazev v'zeh yored v'lokeach, or Bazev v'zeh yored v'lokate. And again, he's offering two possibilities. Mar breid Ravana masnile lekula. That bazeh yored v'lokate u'b'vad shelo yilko biyad. Okay, then this will stop here on Daf Lamites Amid Aleph.